that preserves them every moment is the mere arbitrary will and uncovenanted, unobliged forbearance of an incensed God. The use of this awful subject may be for unawakened, unconverted persons in this congregation. This that you have heard is the case of every one of you that are out of Christ. That world, that lake of burning brimstone, is extended abroad under you. There is the dreadful pit of the glowing flames of the wrath of God. There is hell's wide gaping mouth open, and you've come to house of worship late. Sit down where you are. And you have nothing to stand upon, nor anything to take hold of. There is nothing between you and hell but the air. It is only the power and mere pleasure of God that holds you up. You probably are not sensible of this. You find you are kept out of hell, but you do not see the hand of God in it, but look at other things, as the good state of your bodily constitution, your care for your own life, and the means you use for your own preservation. But indeed, these things are nothing. If God should withdraw his hand, they would avail no more to keep you from falling than the thin air to hold up a person that is suspended in it. Your wickedness makes you, as it were, heavy as lead, and to tend downwards with great weight and pressure towards hell. And if God should let you go, you would immediately sink and swiftly descend and plunge into the bottomless gulf. And your healthy constitution, and your own care and prudence and best contrivance, and all your righteousness would have no more influence to uphold you and keep you out of hell than a spider's web would have to stop a fallen rock. Were it not for the sovereign pleasure of God, the earth would not bear you one moment. You are a burden to it. The corruption groans with you. The creature is made subject to the bondage of your corruption, not willingly. The sun does not willingly shine upon you to give you light to serve sin and Satan. The earth does not willingly yield her increase to satisfy your lusts, nor is it willingly a stage for your wickedness to be acted upon. The air does not willingly serve you for breath to maintain the flame of your vitals, while you spend your life in the servants of God's enemies. God's creatures are good, and were made for men to serve God with, and do not willingly subserve to any other purpose, and groan when they are abused to purposes not directly contrary to their nature and end. And the world would spew you out, were it not for the sovereign hand of him who hath subjected it in hope. There are black clouds of God's wrath now hanging directly over your head. Stay awake in the back, full of the dreadful storm and big with thunder. And were it not with the restraining hand of God, it would immediately burst forth upon you. The sovereign pleasure of God, for the present, stays his rough wind. Otherwise, it would come with fury, and your destruction would come like a whirlwind, and you would be like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. The wrath of God is like the great waters that are dammed for the present. They increase more and more and rise higher and higher till an outlet is given, and the longer the stream is stopped, the more rapid and mighty is its course when once it let loose. Just a few words from the application part of perhaps the most famous Puritan sermon, Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And we can only imagine what this would have been like for the Puritan community. Of course, Edwards would have had his clerical vestments on. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to get out of my vestments because this is really hot. So Be right back. That's much better. I'm a little just with his clerical vestments on. A lot of people, when they read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, they read it with imagining Jonathan Edwards pounding the pulpit and shouting. But this is something he did not do when he preached. He was a reader. So he would script out his sermons ahead of time, and then he would read them, but of course put inflections into the sermon. So when we go through and we listen to, when we read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, what do we see? Well, believe it or not, we see some of the same things that we did before with the other Puritan writers. That they all have the common theme of trying to demystify God through commonplace events, common things that they would have had in their world. For example, a spider's web, right? Something we're all familiar with. The idea of water and a dam, right? Something that would be commonplace. The idea of a pit, right? Commonplace. The idea of an arrow being loosed from the taut bow, something that would have been not only in their, commonplace for their world, but something that they would have been worried about as well. All of these natural disaster type situations, as well as the arrow let loose from the bow, something they would have been afraid of from the Indian attacks, right? So when we sit and we read through Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, it's meant to demystify God and to glorify God. And you might have been wondering, well, gosh, what could have happened to these Puritans for this work, right, this Puritan sermon to be written and delivered? And in case you're curious, yes, the Puritans had started to backslide. Exactly. This community that was meant to be the city on the hill, the New Jerusalem, in case you're curious, Salem, Massachusetts, right? You're familiar with Salem? It's one of the early settlements there. Salem, that part comes from the word Jerusalem. When you look at the word Jerusalem, you see Salem. That's right, it was meant to be a mimic. These were the people that were entering into a covenant with God. Biblical language. They were trying to live out this experiment in living day to day. Every day was going to be Sunday for these people, but they had started to backslide. So what happened in the Puritan colonies is something today that we call the Great Awakening. And a good way to think about the Great Awakening, it would be very similar in nature to in the summer, right? In our service area, you often see revival tents, right? You'll see a sign stating revival, and then there'll be revival tents in different parts throughout our Tri-County service area. That's a good way to think about what was happening with the Great Awakening. The Puritans had been here in the New World for many generations. In case you're curious, Jonathan Edwards was a contemporary of Benjamin Franklin. That's right. So the Enlightenment has been going on, which we'll talk about the Enlightenment very soon. So there was a lot of change that has started to filter into the Puritan colonies. So what the Puritan preachers were trying to do, and Jonathan Edwards was just one of them, there were many others, is that they were trying to awaken the faith of the Puritans that had started to become watered down, a little bit wearied, because again, this is several generations that we've been in the New World. So the zeal and the lust for God and establishing the city on the hill, this New Jerusalem, had started to wane a little bit and become worldly, become a little bit more secular. So we'll continue talking about the Great Awakening and what starts to happen to this experiment in life with America in the next lecture.